Hi. So this is chapter 27. I do want to say one thing. I have fun with this art. A lot of fun. I wanted to try a different style though with it, which is why it looks a little weird. Um, I wanted trying a color. I don't know what it's called. It's where you basically like do color outlines. Like a character's outline is still there, but like the inside is usually one solid color. I didn't like how it looked though, so I added this gradient that shows Izuku's original color, like coat color. So it's not true to his design, but I thought it would be fun. So I did it. Anyway, this is chapter 27 of Black Cat's Bad Luck, and so are you, kid. Now let's get on into the story here. After the men were done with him, they tossed him back into the box he had come from, shutting the lid harshly and laughing. The boss had beaten him and used his quirk on Izuku. He shivered at the reminder, a still sizzling bald patch resting on his side. He couldn't move, not from his bones being broken, luckily, but rather from exhaustion. The boss stated he didn't want him dead, at least not yet. And so they had taken to tying him up and throwing him around the room until the boss was pleased. Then he had used his quirk, a bright blue electricity. Izuku recalled how the flickering light had trailed up his arm like a snake, curling around his arm till it reached his hand and coiled up like it was about to strike. He had monologued for a moment, but Izuku's brain was still trying to right itself again, so he didn't hear nor understand the man, though he quickly yowled in pain as the lightning struck his side. He huffed, closing his eyes and trying to rest, small tears forming from his eyes. The other men had left, leaving Izuku alone in the box and the dark. He didn't even have the strength to turn around and see out the small hole behind him, or cover himself with the shirt that Mammoth had provided. He was lucky the men simply tossed him in without a care, not looking inside, and he was even luckier that he landed on the cloth. If they had looked inside and saw the items within the box, they probably would have taken them. He whined softly and twitched. His entire body hurt, and his side burned. Luckily, the men seemed to be talking about celebrating and leaving, so he would be alone for a while. He was thankful the only lights in the warehouse came from the broken windows, as they couldn't shut them off. Small things, he supposed. He wasn't left in total darkness, though the silence was grating. He'd rather it than the boss and his lackeys return, though. He sighed and figured he should try and sleep, so he turned his brain off with one final call for help to his teachers, a request for them to please hurry and find him. Everyone knows the plan, right? Zukachi asked as he finished his presentation. The heroes in the room all nodded, eager to get going. Shota especially was practically vibrating in his seat, ready to burst into the warehouse and kick that bastard's ass. He was going to be bait, as apparently the man was dead set on punishing him for his crimes. A few other stealth heroes would get in close, and they would attack when the villain was surrounded. Once they had begun the initial attack, the other heroes would flood inside, and the police would surround the place. A sound plan. The only problem in Shota's eyes was the fact they were not going to begin until late into the night. Izuku only had less than 24 hours left as a feline, and who knew what those bastards would do if they got a hold of him in human form, or what he would do to himself. Currently, Shota was pacing in the police department, listening to the hustle and bustle of the police station. He tried to keep out of the way, keeping to one corner cleared for heroes like him. Shota watched him, worried look adoring his features. Shota hated to worry the other, but he couldn't sit or calm down. He wanted to move. He wanted to move now. Every instinct in his body was telling him to move, to go, to get the young boy back. But he wasn't allowed to go, especially not on his own. He grit his teeth and paced some more until the blond man finally had enough. He sighed and stood, walking over to the pacing man who stopped to look at his husband. The man smiled softly, a comforting gesture, and spoke softly to the other. You need to rest. You can't save him if you're tired from pacing. Shota sighed to himself and slumped, his head falling onto his husband's shoulder. The man smiled softly and rubbed the man's back gently, slowly walking backwards and helping the man sit down on the chairs behind him. Shota curled up and laid his head onto the man's shoulder, closing his eyes with a soft huff. Zachi smiled softly and rubbed his back till the other man went to sleep. Shota woke not 2 hours later, and both men went to get some food and water. They spoke quietly to each other for some time, finishing their food and discussing random things to keep their mind off the trail ahead. Their conversation only lasted half an hour. However, the raid party began to head out. Both men followed behind, preparing themselves. Once they had arrived at the rendezvous point, they reiterated the plan one final time. Then the police department, preparing to surround the building, and Shota split away from the group to approach the building. He went around the side, careful of any security measures the villains may have put in place, and looked through a broken part of the window. Inside, he saw 9 of the bastards sitting in the old warehouse, drinking and celebrating. There was no sign of a Midoriya, both a good and bad thing. He grunted and quietly spoke into his calm. I have eyes on all 9. They're in the warehouse, dead center. No sign of Midoriya. He heard a confirmation and a command for everyone else to begin surrounding the place, and then he instructed to begin Phase 2. He confirmed that he heard the command and climbed up into a window that he could slide into. He heard the comms flare to life as commands were shot through it, but Shota ignored them. He focused on the scene below. The 9 villains were none the wiser to his present, most of them too drunk and unsteady to even see a few feet in front of them. He looked around the warehouse and tried to see if there was any sign of his student, but he didn't find any. There was a crash below and he curled closer to the beam he sat on and peered over at the group. But one of them had thrown their beer bottle and was cheering. He relaxed slightly, curling closer to the beam and out of sight, and whispered into his calm. They seemed to be drunk, all 9 still accounted for. Still no sign of Midoriya. The comm flickered to life once more, and he heard a response from the raid leader. Affirmative. We have surrounded the building, and pros are around the area. Whenever you're ready, Eraserhead. Shooter sighed and spoke into his comm once more. I'm good to go. Affirmative. Move in, everyone. Azuki was trying to sleep. He felt like shit, but the villains outside the metal box he was contained in decided to have a party. He sighed once more and tried to sleep again, but one of the men threw a bottle and shattered it on the wall, spooking him. Their cheers made him all the more fearful and uncomfortable. He just wanted to go home. It seemed the gods heard his wish, as in the next minute he heard multiple loud crashes all around the walls of the room, and they were situated in the enraged and confused calls of villains outside. They called out that heroes had arrived, and Izuku felt his heart skip a beat. He tried to sit up and look out the small hole in the bottom of the metal crate, but it was for naught, as someone slammed into the side of the box as the fight broke out. Izuku was tossed aside as the box tumbled and he let out a loud and pained yowl. Then he landed on his bad leg and sore side. He laid unmoving, trying to get the dark world around him to stop spinning so quickly. Before he could even attempt to stand to try and get his footing, the lid of the box was ripped off from where it laid on its side, and a hand harshly grabbed the scruff. He yowled once more as he was yanked from the dark space and into the bright light. He was thrown around by his scruff as the person who held him ran, and his head spun with the motions. He could only hear loud thuds and cries as his ears began to clog. They could only see blurry figures as his vision swayed. He had closed his eyes once the motions had started, trying to keep him from hacking up what little was in his stomach. All of the commotion stopped as he was yanked high into the air, and something sharp and cold was pressed to his throat. He tried to open one of his eyes, but he was up closer to a light, and he found opening his eyes hurt. He shut them and curled tighter into a ball. His autonomy forced him into when held by the scruff. He whined as the man behind him began to yell, his voice reverberating in Izuku's skull. Now then, if you want to see this little fuck alive, you'll drop your weapons and surrender now. There was a pause, and then Izuku heard a clatter of metal. He whimpered in distress. The heroes were surrendering for his sake and putting themselves in danger. He forced his eyes open to see many heroes he knew, being restrained by the villains that had tortured him. He didn't want them to be hurt because of him. Now they were all at the mercy of the villains. The man holding Izuku laughed and brought the small cat down from where he'd been holding him high in the air. He kept the sharp thing close to Izuku's throat and hummed thoughtfully. There we go. Now then, Eraser, you and I seem to have some unfinished business. Why don't you come with us and tell us how you made our friend talk? Izuku looked to see his teacher, hands raised in surrender, walking up to them. There was one of the villains behind him, following along with a wicked smile on his face. The rest of the heroes were restrained by villains and tied to a post in the center of the building. He grit his teeth and tried not to cry. His stupid kitten body wouldn't let him move more than his face and his tail when he was held by the scruff. It was infuriating and made him useless. The man holding Izuku walked over as Izuku's teacher approached. And Izuku saw the man look at Izuku, worriedly checking him over. He saw the man stiffen when he got a good look at Izuku's injuries. Though before the Raven Man could do anything more, he was punched in the jaw by the man holding him, and held up by the villain behind him. The man laughed and shook Izuku around a bit. Well, 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 let's have a discussion, shall we? The raven-haired man did nothing but glare, and the boss laughed more. His teacher was roughly shoved towards the back rooms, followed by all the villains. Izuku heard that they were going to try and make an escape. He tried to wiggle, but all his body did was twitch a little bit. They made their way into the dark hall of the rooms where the men stayed, and they grabbed their things before walking out towards the secret exit down below. Before any of them could get far, something grabbed the wrist of the man holding Izuku from the dark room they passed. The group paused and looked over. Izuku perked up when he saw the man responsible. Mammoth stood there, angrily looking down at the man holding Izuku and grunted angrily. Let them go. The boss laughed and tightened his grip on Izuku, making him whimper. The group turned to Mammoth, glaring daggers into the large man. What will you do, Mammoth? There's 8 of us and 1 of you. Mammoth sighed and began to speak. He looked down at the group, eyes filled with hatred and anger, but also a hint of satisfaction. You underestimate me. You hurt me. You think I'm dumb because I'm big and strong, and I do everything I'm told. Sure, I may be a bit less smart than all of you here, but I'm no less capable. And besides, 2 of you are gonna have to hold that hero, and you've gotta hold that hostage. That betters my chances. The men stiffened and the boss scoffed. He further tightened his hold on Izuku's scruff, making him whimper again. Though this action did not go unpunished. Mammoth began tightening his hold dangerously on the boss's wrist, making the man cry out and drop Izuku. The small cat fell, but was quickly caught by the large man in a familiar hand. Izuku looked up to see Mammoth worriedly looking down at Izuku, and Izuku purred softly to let the other know he was okay. The giant smiled and sighed, relieved, looking back at the group. As he did, the boss grit his teeth and yelled out, "Well, what are you scum waiting for? Get him!" The group immediately sprang into action, all at once, but Mammoth simply grunted, and with one of his giant arms, he swung it to the side and tossed the 5 men that charged him, flying back down the hall. 2 more sprang at Mammoth, electricity quirks at the ready, and Mammoth brought Izuku close to his chest and blocked their attacks with one of his arms. He grunted in pain before shoving the 2 back, arms smoking. Izuku looked up at him and meowed worriedly. Meow! 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 But the man smiled down at him reassuringly. Boss grit his teeth and tried to attack himself, but before he could, Izuku's teacher sprang into action and knocked the villain down. Man seemed surprised for a moment, but sighed and smiled at the other. His teacher looked up at Mammoth, distrust written in his eyes, but Mammoth simply held out his arms, giving Izuku back to his teacher. The man quickly grabbed him and looked him over. The man was shaking, and so Izuku purred softly to try and soothe the man. It worked somewhat. As the man calmed down and took a breath, he gently inspected Izuku's side, and Izuku tried not to squirm. His face became one of displeasure and worry, his eyebrows frowning. He took a breath and hugged Izuku close to his chest. Izuku let the man do as he needed, and he closed his eyes and breathed the familiar scent happily. He both heard and felt the man talk to where he was pressed against his chest, and looked up to address Mammoth. Are you all right? Mammoth looked at his teacher, surprised, but nodded, covering the large smoldering mark on his arm. His teacher huffed disbelievingly, but did not press further. He instead looked over towards the exit where the previous fight had been to see many heroes rushing in. They all pushed as they saw the scene, but then President Mike pushed past them and rushed over to the raven-haired man, taking his face into his hands and looking the other over. Azuka trilled up happily at the man, and he looked down with a relieved smile. Though, like his husband, once he caught sight of the wounds, he worried. Mammoth cleared his throat, and when they looked over at the giant was nervously twitching his hands together, keeping his injured arm out of sight. President Mike looked over his husband confusedly, to which the man sighed and spoke up. He saved us. He stopped them before they tried anything. The blonde sighed and nodded. The other heroes that had been leaving them alone in favor of restraining the other villains finally approaching the giant man. Zuko flicked his tail and trilled at the giant, who blinked surprisingly down at him. Zuko dipped his head, bowing to the best he could to the man to thank him. The man smiled softly and bowed back, allowing the heroes to lead him down the hallway. His teachers watched him confused before walking out of the hallway themselves, taking Zuko to the EMT nearby. He was rushed to the hospital, being checked over in an ambulance by nurses who knew enough animal first aid to prepare him for the hospital. Exhausted, Zuko lay limp as they worked, watching his teachers who were huddled close together, watching him like a hawk. He chirped happily at them, closing his eyes and attempting to smile. They huffed amusedly, his homeroom teacher reaching over to where he was and laid on the bed to rub his head gently. With his teachers close and everyone safe and sound, he finally closed his eyes and went to sleep. His teacher watched, relief flooding through them at their ward being safe and sound in their arms once more. 。 . 。 . 。 . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . 。 . . . 。 . . 。 . 。 . . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . Yeah. We love dying. Okay. Okay, okay. Get some noises of Pika trying to adjust sitting. One more chapter! Well, technically two, but the last chapter is a little. What is it called? My brain is not fucking working. Oh, yeah, it's a stance. So I'm not gonna read the stance when that happens. I'm just gonna make a note at the end of chapter 28 after saying like the end or something. I don't know. I'm just excited. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Bye.